When 6-year-old Ethan Parker pushed open the frosted door of Harbor Diner at sunrise, snow still clinging to his green puffer jacket and a fading bruise hidden beneath his sleeve, no one inside expected him to walk straight toward a table of off-duty veterans sipping black coffee. His small voice barely rose above the scrape of forks and the hum of the heater. But what he said next would alter the course of dozens of lives. "Sir, could you be my dad just for today?" This is a story about the family we choose when home becomes the place a child fears most. About the courage of a boy who asked for help, and the men who refused to let him stand alone. If you still believe kindness survives, that protection is a duty, and that goodness can rise from the unlikeliest corners. Stay with us. Before we begin, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Because what happened that snowy morning in Boston might just restore your faith in humanity. Every Saturday at 6 a.m., the veterans group known as Harbor Guard met at Harbor Diner, until the day a small boy in a green jacket walked in and asked for a father. The boy with the green backpack on a winter morning. Winter pressed low over Boston, a pale frost drifting between brick buildings as if the whole city was holding its breath. Ethan Parker hesitated at the door of Harbor Diner before pushing it open with both hands. Warm air rushed out to greet him, carrying the mixed scents of frying bacon, burnt coffee, and old wood soaked with years of weary laughter. He stood small against the doorway, 6 years old, narrow-shouldered, a little underfed, and buzzing with the restless energy of a child who should have grown up carefree but hadn't. His round cheeks were pink from the cold, his pale skin flushed at the edges, and his gray eyes, bright, curious, and too old for his age, swept the room quickly, as if measuring danger the way other children scanned for crayons. His blonde hair, messy beneath a knitted beanie, curled just enough to shadow the edges of his face. His green puffer jacket was puffed up like a small marshmallow, the bright color softened by bits of frost clinging to the seams. Dark jeans and worn sneakers completed the picture of a boy who looked like he ran instead of walked, escaped instead of stayed, hoped instead of believed. Ethan clutched the strap of his green superhero backpack. Its once brilliant print faded from too many days of being dragged through places a 6-year-old shouldn't have been. He swallowed hard. Then he made his way across the diner toward the table of men whose laughter had stopped the moment he entered. They were veterans, retired from years of service, but still carrying the rigid posture of men who had spent too long in danger to ever relax completely. Most were in their 50s or 60s, big-boned, weathered by sun and storms and memories. They wore old jackets, thick flannel shirts, heavy boots, and the kind of expressions that warned strangers not to pick a fight, but also hinted that they would give the last dollar in their pockets if someone truly needed it. At the center of them sat Luke Turner, the only man at the table who looked like he hadn't slept well in years. He was around 40, tall, with broad shoulders and a compact strength in his frame. He wore a navy winter coat that hung straight despite its weight, and beneath it a red and black flannel shirt tucked neatly into faded jeans. His square jaw was dusted with a well-kept beard, trimmed short but flecked with silver at his temples. A thin scar traced the edge of his chin like a memory refusing to fade. His dark brown eyes were warm when he laughed, distant when he reminisced, and sharp enough to read trouble from across a room. His left leg was stiff, an old battlefield injury that turned every step into a reminder of a day he didn't talk about. It gave his gait a slight hitch, but somehow made him look stronger, not weaker. Beside him lay Shadow, a German shepherd of 5 years, muscular and disciplined. His coat was black along the spine, fading to tan over his legs and face. His ears were always alert, his gaze thoughtful, and his posture one of silent vigilance. He had served beside Luke during long recovery missions after storms and accidents, and though he no longer wore a harness, the habit of protection lived in his bones. Ethan stopped in front of Luke. His breath trembled. His fingers dug into the zipper of his jacket. For a heartbeat, the diner seemed to shrink around him. Then he spoke. "Sir, could you be my dad today?" His voice was soft, shaky, but certain, like the desperate last thread someone clings to before the fall. The entire diner froze. Forks hung mid-air. A waitress, a thin middle-aged woman with reddish-brown hair pinned messily on top of her head, paused with a coffee pot tilted in one hand. A retired trucker sitting by the window lowered his newspaper. Even Shadow lifted his head, studying Ethan as though he recognized something wounded in him. Luke blinked, stunned by the boldness of the request, and even more stunned by the fear behind it. Ethan's gray eyes were searching him, hopeful and terrified all at once, as if Luke alone stood between him and something unbearable waiting outside. Luke leaned forward slowly, trying not to frighten him. "Why me, kid?" Ethan hesitated. His lips trembled. Then he whispered, "I thought, you look like someone who wouldn't let me get hurt today. It's career day at school. Everyone's bringing their dads. I don't have one." A beat of silence stretched between them, one filled with the weight of truths the boy didn't say. Luke noticed then the faint purple smudge on Ethan's wrist, half hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket. A bruise, too small to be an accident, too familiar for Luke to mistake. Something deep in his chest, something that had once commanded men through fire and chaos, stirred awake. Shadow nudged Ethan gently, pressing his warm head against the boy's knee, and Ethan's shoulders fell, as if some invisible burden had loosened. Luke exhaled, slow and steady, before answering. "All right," he said quietly. "For today, I can be your dad." And just like that, everything began to change. The bruise on his wrist and the veteran's promise. The hum of the diner seemed to fold in on itself after Ethan spoke. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The clink of ceramic against stainless steel died out. And even the old ceiling fan above them sounded suddenly too loud, chopping the warm air into uneven pieces. Luke Turner felt every eye at the table slide toward him. He had been many things in 40 years. A fresh-faced recruit with a buzz cut and too much faith in orders, a squad leader shouting over gunfire, a man who came home with one bad knee and too many bad dreams. These days he was mostly a mechanic who worked too late and pretended the ache in his chest was just from the cold Boston winter. But he had never, in all those roles, heard a question quite like the one this small boy had just asked. "Sir, could you be my dad just for today?" Up close, the boy looked even smaller than he had when he stood in the doorway. Ethan's green puffer jacket made him look like a little balloon someone had forgotten to tie down. His round face was flushed from the cold, his gray eyes too bright, like they were holding back something heavy. A smear of dried cocoa clung to the corner of his mouth. Someone had tried to give him something warm and sweet before this morning, Luke thought, and the idea hurt more than it should have. "Easy, kid," a voice murmured behind Luke, rough but gentle. It was Matt O'Connor, one of the veterans at the table, a man in his early 50s with a thick ginger beard and a nose that had taken more than one punch. Matt was broad-shouldered, with a barrel chest and a faded tattoo of a falcon on his left hand. He'd been a military medic once, the kind who would walk into gunfire if it meant dragging someone else out. Now he mostly cracked jokes too loudly and made sure everyone's coffee cup was never empty. Luke pushed his chair back with a soft scrape. His navy coat shifted open as he stood, revealing the red and black flannel shirt underneath and the lean frame that years of carrying packs and tools had carved down to the basics. His left leg protested as he straightened. The old injury in his knee gave that familiar hot twist, a phantom echo of the day metal and bone had met in a place far from Boston. He forced his weight through it anyway and moved around the table until he stood right in front of Ethan. Shadow, the German shepherd, rose too. The dog was 5 years old, in the prime of his strength, with a black saddle of fur across his back and warm tan coloring on his legs and muzzle. Once, Shadow had been trained as a search and rescue dog, taught to move toward danger instead of away from it. Those days were officially over, but his dark eyes still scanned every room like he was cataloging threats, and he always seemed to know when someone in the space was hurting, even if they didn't say a word. Luke lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the bite in his left leg. It was a small sacrifice to meet the boy's gaze level. "Hey there," he said quietly. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Ethan," the boy answered. His voice was soft, but it didn't tremble as much as Luke had expected. "Ethan Parker. Ethan Parker," Luke repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "I'm Luke, and this big guy is Shadow. He takes his job very seriously." Shadow stepped forward obediently, tail gently swaying, and rested his head within reach of Ethan's small fingers. The boy's hand went out almost automatically, fingers disappearing into the thick fur between Shadow's ears. The dog sighed, a deep, contented sound, and leaned into the touch. Luke's eyes dropped to Ethan's wrist. The sleeve of the green jacket had ridden up just enough for him to see it, a dark, mottled bruise circling the thin bone, the kind of mark that didn't come from bumping into a table. It looked like a handprint, the faded edges blooming out like spilled ink under pale skin. Luke had seen bruises like that on soldiers who had been handled too roughly by their own fear. He'd seen them on women at shelters where he volunteered once a month, bringing donated tools and fixing broken doorknobs. He'd seen them in the mirror on his own arms in the early days back home, when the only way he'd known how to feel anything had been to hit something. His stomach clenched. "Where's your mom, Ethan?" Luke asked carefully. The boy's fingers tightened in Shadow's fur. "She's at work," he said. "She works at the hotel, nights and mornings. She's tired a lot." "And your dad?" Matt asked from the table, his voice cautious. "My real dad died," Ethan replied. The words came out flat, like he'd said them 100 times already, and the sharpness had worn off, leaving only a dull ache. "He fell from a building when I was 3. Mom said he was brave. He fixed things." Luke's chest pinched. He could picture it too easily. A construction site, a missed step, a phone call that tore a young woman's life in half. "And the man at home now?" Luke pushed gently. "The one who isn't brave?" Ethan's lips pressed together. Shadow nudged his shoulder as if encouraging him. The boy swallowed. "His name is Carl," Ethan whispered. "Mom married him last year. He was nice at first. He brought me a toy truck and said he'd teach me how to fix real cars when I got big. But then he lost his job at the garage. He says everything's my fault. He gets mad when I make noise, or if I spill things, or if I breathe too loud when he's watching TV. His gray eyes went distant, like he was replaying a scene he wished he could erase. "Last night I spilled milk," he continued. "Carl grabbed my arm and threw me into the wall. Mom tried to stop him. He said I did it on purpose. He said I don't listen. He said kids who don't listen need to learn." Luke inhaled slowly through his nose. Behind him, he heard a chair creak as someone shifted, a muttered curse, then another breath being sucked in too sharply. These men had seen war, but there was something about violence turned inward on a small house, on a boy in a green jacket, that made a different kind of fury rise. "Why today?" Luke asked. His voice stayed calm, but every muscle in his body felt coiled. "Why do you need a dad just for today?" Ethan licked his lips. "It's career day," he said. "At Riverside Elementary, everyone's supposed to bring their mom or dad to talk about their job. Last year I didn't have anyone. This year Mom said she'd try, but her boss called and said if she misses one more shift, we might lose the room. Carl said he won't go. He said his job is none of their business, and that if I tell anyone he doesn't have work anymore, he'll make sure I regret it." He looked up at Luke, raw hope flickering under the fear. "I thought, if someone like you came," he murmured. "If a soldier came, or someone like a soldier, Carl would know someone's watching. Maybe he wouldn't break things anymore." Luke felt something old and dormant roar awake inside him. It was the same instinct that had made him step between his men and a line of fire years ago. The same gut-deep oath that had built itself inside him when he watched kids in dusty villages stare at helicopters like they were dragons. Protect the small. Stand in the doorway. Take the hit if you have to. Matt cleared his throat loudly. "Well, kid," he said, trying for lightness and mostly failing, "you picked the right table. Out of everyone here, Luke's the only one pretty enough to pass for someone's dad. Rest of us look like trouble." A ripple of laughter passed around the table, rough and a little shaky. Ethan's shoulders dropped a half an inch. The tension didn't vanish, but it loosened just enough for him to breathe. Luke put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. His palm nearly covered the whole top of it. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and steady, "I can come with you today. I can show up at your school. I can talk about fixing engines and fixing things that used to be broken." He paused. "But what's happening at home? That doesn't stay the same after today. Do you understand?" Gray eyes met brown. For a moment, Luke saw past the bruise in the jacket and the snow still melting in the boy's hair. He saw the same steel he'd seen in younger soldiers who refused to leave anyone behind. "I don't want Mom to get in trouble," Ethan whispered. "She says we need Carl's money. Even if he doesn't have a job, she thinks he will again. She thinks maybe he'll be nice again." "Your mom needs you alive more than she needs his promises," Luke replied softly. "We're going to make sure she understands that. And we're going to make sure Carl understands something too." He squeezed the boy's shoulder once. "This thing with Carl, it stops. Today." Ethan blinked. A single tear escaped, sliding quickly down his cheek before he could swipe it away with the back of his hand. But when he spoke, his voice was steadier. "So, you'll be my dad for today?" he asked. Luke felt an answer form in places he thought had gone numb. Kid, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting, for today, I'll be whatever you need me to be. Behind him, the other veterans straightened, something like a silent agreement settling in the air. Shadow leaned closer to Ethan, pressing his warm side against the boy's leg. For the first time in a long time, Luke's promise felt less like words and more like a mission. And missions, in his world, were not things you walked away from. Motorcycles, falling snow, and a temporary family in the schoolyard. By the time the first real light of morning pushed through the low Boston clouds, the Harbor Diner's parking lot looked less like a place for pancakes and more like a staging area for a small, very loud invasion. Luke stood just outside the door, breath curling in pale clouds as he watched the street. The snow hadn't started again yet, but old drifts lay in crooked piles along the curb, stained gray by traffic. His knee throbbed in the cold, a familiar drumbeat under the denim of his jeans, but he barely registered it. His mind was already 3 hours ahead, in a school gym he hadn't seen, imagining rows of kids and one boy in a green jacket looking for him in the crowd. The first motorcycle rolled in at 7:10. It was a big touring bike, black with old dustings of salt on the pipes, ridden by a tall man in his late 40s, wearing a faded army green parka over a leather vest. This was Daniel Ruiz, a former infantryman with olive skin, close-cropped dark hair peppered by gray, and a thin scar running along his jaw like someone had once tried to erase his smile and failed. Daniel had grown up in a rough neighborhood, the eldest of 5, and had been the kind of teenager who got into fights defending kids smaller than him. The army had given his fists a purpose. Leaving the army had taken that purpose away. Now he worked as a night security guard and spent his weekends volunteering at a youth boxing gym, teaching kids how to hit pads instead of walls. He swung his leg off the bike and grinned at Luke, teeth flashing white against the morning chill. "Heard you picked up a mission, Turner," Daniel called. "Figured you'd need backup. Can't have you hogging all the hero points." Luke snorted. "Trust you to show up early just to steal my coffee," he said, but his chest eased a little. The sight of Daniel always brought a sense of solid ground. The man was as dependable as gravity. More bikes followed. By 8 Oak, the row of motorcycles stretched almost the length of the block. Harleys with wide handlebars, leaner street bikes, a couple of older models that wheezed like smokers but refused to die. Each new arrival brought another veteran or spouse, layered in winter gear, thick coats over hoodies, gloves tucked into belts, beanies pulled low. Their faces were a map of lines and stories. A woman in her 40s with deep laugh lines and a crooked nose from a teenage skateboarding accident. A stocky man in his 50s with close-cropped white hair and an anchor tattoo fading on his neck. A younger vet in his early 30s with dark circles under his eyes from too many late shifts as an EMT. Some brought family. One woman, Jessica Hall, slid off the back of her husband's bike and helped a little girl of about 7 down from the seat. Jessica was in her late 30s, tall and slender, with warm brown skin and tight black curls tucked under a wool hat. She had been an Army logistics officer once, the kind of person who could make food and fuel appear in impossible places, and now she worked as a hospital administrator. Her daughter, Maya, wore a purple coat and stared at the growing line of bikes with wide, delighted eyes. "Is the kid coming?" Jessica asked Luke, voice low but serious. "The one you texted about?" "He's inside," Luke said. "Ethan, 6 years old, smart, too brave for his own good." "Sounds familiar," Jessica murmured, glancing at Daniel and Matt. "We're going with you." Inside the diner, Ethan sat in a corner booth with Shadow pressed tightly against his side. The boy's green jacket was unzipped now, revealing a plain gray sweatshirt underneath. His backpack sat beside him on the vinyl seat, the straps twisted as if they had been clutched and released too many times. He watched each new rider through the window with a mixture of awe and nervousness, like he wasn't sure whether he had accidentally summoned superheroes or trouble. Shadow, sensing the restless energy, kept his head resting on Ethan's lap, eyes half closed but ears twitching every time a motorcycle engine revved outside. "You ready, kid?" Matt asked, sliding a glass of orange juice onto the table. He filled the space with his bulk, but his voice had softened, the rough edges sanded down for Ethan's sake. "They're all here for you, you know. Haven't seen this many show up on time since free barbecue was involved." Ethan gave a small, crooked smile. "They're all coming to school?" he asked. "Everyone who could get out of work or lie convincingly," Daniel said, leaning on the back of the booth. "Turns out, Protecting a kid is a pretty good excuse. Luke slid into the seat across from Ethan. He had changed nothing about his clothes, the navy coat, the red and black flannel, the worn jeans and boots. But somehow he looked different now to the boy, more like the idea of a father than a stranger in a diner. Maybe it was just the way he was looking at Ethan, with his full attention, as if nothing outside the booth existed. "Here's how this is going to go," Luke said calmly. "We're going to ride to Riverside. You'll ride with me and Shadow. We go slow, we follow the rules, no showing off. When we get there, we walk you inside. If anyone asks, I'm your dad. That's it." "What about Carl?" Ethan blurted, then winced at having said the name out loud. "What if he shows up? What if he's mad?" Luke's jaw tightened for a heartbeat, then eased. "We've already made some calls," he said. "There are people who handle men like Carl. Today he doesn't get to decide anything. You do. Your mom will too, but not him." Ethan stared at the table. His small fingers traced the cracks in the laminate. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." 20 minutes later, the convoy rolled out. Ethan sat behind Luke on the bike, wedged securely between the man and a thick strap, a small extra helmet snug over his blonde hair. His arms wrapped around Luke's middle, fingers digging into the flannel. Shadow rode in a special sidecar that Luke had modified years ago, half as a joke and half because the dog hated being left behind. Now, the German Shepherd sat upright, chest out, nose lifted to catch every scent in the cold air, like a general surveying the world. Traffic parted in quiet confusion as the line of bikes moved through the city streets, not fast, but with the kind of deliberate formation that said these people were used to moving together. Some pedestrians stopped to stare, phones already out. A few drivers honked, not in anger, but in bewildered greeting. Ethan watched Boston slide by. Brick buildings with frost on their windowsills, a park bench buried in snow, a woman in a bright red coat dragging a reluctant dog along the sidewalk. For the first time in months, he didn't feel small and invisible. He felt carried, like he was in the middle of something much bigger than his fear. By the time they reached Riverside Elementary, the school parking lot was already crowded with sedans and SUVs. Parents in wool coats guided kids with colorful backpacks toward the main entrance. Some adults carried briefcases or toolboxes or laptops, props for career day stories about law and medicine and coding and construction. The rumble of 50 motorcycle engines arriving together was not part of anyone's plan. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A little boy in a puffy red coat tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, much too loudly, "Mom, are those the good guys or the bad guys?" Ethan felt Luke chuckle under his hands. "Guess we'll have to show them, huh?" the man said over his shoulder. The bikes pulled into a row along the far side of the lot, engines ticking as they cooled. One by one, riders swung their legs over and stood, stretching, stomping boots against the snow. The veterans shrugged out of extra layers, revealing flashes of unit patches and old pins sewn into their vests. Shadow jumped lightly from the sidecar to the ground, shook himself, and fell into step beside Ethan as Luke lifted the boy down from the bike. Near the front doors, a woman in her mid-50s stepped forward. She wore a long black wool coat and a dark green scarf, her gray-streaked brown hair pulled back into a low bun. Her name was Patricia Lane, principal of Riverside Elementary. Patricia was not tall, but she carried herself with the upright posture of someone who had spent decades standing in front of classrooms and refusing to let chaos win. Fine lines fanned out from the corners of her hazel eyes, the map of a career spent worrying about other people's children. She glanced from the motorcycles to the boy in the green jacket, to the big man with a slight limp and the German Shepherd at his side. "Good morning," she said, voice even but not unfriendly. "Can I help you folks with something?" Luke stopped a few feet from her, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied. "Today is career day, right? Ethan here invited me. I'm his dad for the day." He let the sentence sit there, simple and solid, daring anyone to knock it over. Principal Lane's gaze dropped, almost unconsciously, to the edge of Ethan's sleeve, where the faint shadow of the bruise still peeked out. Her mouth tightened, just a little. Behind her, Ethan's third-grade teacher, Mrs. Amelia Grant, hovered uncertainly. Amelia was in her early 30s, with light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail and a cardigan that had a tiny coffee stain near the cuff. She had a kind, open face and the tired eyes of someone who graded too many papers at night. She had known Ethan as the quiet boy in the back row, polite, always turning work in on time, but lately he'd seemed thinner, his smiles more brittle. She had noticed. She hadn't known what to do. Now, seeing the bruise and the way Ethan leaned into Luke's side and Shadow's flank, something inside her clicked into place, equal parts guilt and grim resolve. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping closer, "you made it. We're glad you're here." He looked up at her, startled, then offered a small, real smile. Principal Lane made a decision in the span of a breath. She turned to the line of veterans, wives, and children behind them, all waiting with varying degrees of awkwardness and determination. "No problem at all," she said, her voice warming. "Welcome to Riverside Elementary. I think our students are going to learn a lot today." Out in the winter-bright parking lot, under a sky the color of pewter, and over a ground still crusted with last week's snow, they looked like an odd trio, a too small boy in a green jacket, a broad-shouldered veteran with a bad knee, and a German shepherd with serious eyes. But as they walked toward the doors together, it was hard to see them as anything other than what they had quietly become that morning, a temporary family, forming itself in the space where fear had finally met an answer. When one small question shook an entire city, the gymnasium of Riverside Elementary smelled faintly of floor polish and winter jackets drying under the heaters. Rows of tables stood neatly across the room, each decorated with colorful posters and small props representing a parent's career. Doctors with stethoscopes, lawyers with folders, engineers with laptops. Everything looked orderly, predictable, safe. But all of that changed the moment Luke Turner and the veterans stepped inside with 6-year-old Ethan Parker and the massive German shepherd, Shadow, padding closely at the boy's heel. The veterans fanned out behind Luke, each of them standing tall and solemn. Many wore heavy winter coats, their collars dusted with snowflakes that hadn't yet melted. Ethan clutched the strap of his green backpack, his small fingers stiff inside his mittens. But he walked with more confidence than he had that morning. Shadow's presence beside him, steady, alert, tail swaying slowly, was a reassurance no words could have offered. Mrs. Patterson, Ethan's homeroom teacher, stared at the spectacle with wide eyes. She was a woman in her late 40s, short and round-shouldered, with warm copper-brown hair tied in a low bun and kind hazel eyes hidden behind rectangular glasses. Her voice was usually soft, almost apologetic, but in moments of distress she had a tremor no one missed. When she spotted Ethan's bruised wrist, faintly visible beneath his coat sleeve, her hand flew to her mouth. Luke noticed her expression immediately. He stepped forward, calm but unyielding. "Ma'am," he said, "Ethan invited us for career day. We're honored to be here." His voice carried a quiet gravity that made it clear he would not be questioned further. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't frightened of Luke, only devastated that she hadn't seen the signs sooner. She nodded shakily. "Of course, please take your place." As Luke and the veterans set up their small display, a simple table with military patches, a framed photo of Shadow during his rescue dog training, and a faded map, they drew every gaze in the gym. The parents murmured among themselves. One woman in a burgundy coat pulled her daughter closer. Another, a tall man with neatly parted blonde hair and the stiff posture of a corporate manager, frowned as if this was some kind of disruption. Ethan felt the room's tension settling around him like snow. He pressed closer to Shadow, whose ear brushed his wrist as the dog shifted protectively. When it was their turn to speak, Luke rested one hand on the table, his other subtly supporting his left knee, the old battlefield injury tightening in the cold. "Good morning," he began. "We're veterans, some retired, some rebuilding. We've served in deserts, mountains, cities, and flood zones. But what we've learned most isn't about war. It's about family, the kind you choose." Shadow sat perfectly still beside him, looking almost regal. Luke introduced him as a 12-year-old rescue dog with a long career assisting search teams after natural disasters. He explained Shadow's calm disposition, his loyalty, and how the dog still slept lightly, waking whenever Luke's nightmares grew too heavy. The room softened. Kids leaned forward, some parents too. Then Luke glanced at Ethan. "And this morning," he continued, voice low, "a brave boy walked into Harbor Diner and asked me a question no child should ever have to ask." The gym went silent. A young boy in the audience, brown-haired, freckled, maybe 8 or 9, lifted his hand hesitantly. Luke nodded encouragingly. "My dad yells at my mom a lot," the boy whispered. "Sometimes he breaks stuff. I don't know if that's normal." His mother, a tired woman with thinning blonde hair and pale skin, tugged him closer, panic clouding her eyes. His father, a broad-shouldered man with stubble and a red, wind-burned face, straightened sharply, jaw clenching. No one spoke. So Luke did. "When I was his age," he said quietly, "I thought the same thing." The boy's mother began to cry. The father scowled and looked ready to argue, until another veteran, Marcus Hill, stepped beside Luke. Marcus was a tall black man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, and a patient, steady manner shaped by years as a military medic and then a community paramedic. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle but firm. "Love doesn't terrorize," he said. "Fear is not normal." Mrs. Patterson was crying openly now, wiping her glasses with her sleeve. Several parents looked away in shame. Others seemed to stand straighter, as though someone had finally spoken aloud something they'd kept buried. By the time Luke finished, the veterans had unintentionally sparked something far larger than a career day presentation. Teachers approached them. Parents whispered urgently. Even Principal Evans, a tall, thin woman with silver hair pulled into a sharp twist and the disciplined stride of someone who once played college basketball, stepped forward with a look of awe. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "this school needs it. These families need it." That was how the idea of Harbor Shield was born, there, in a school gym filled with winter boots, paper posters, and a truth everyone had been afraid to say aloud. Ethan stood small and quiet beside Luke, but the pride swelling in his chest felt too big for his body. Shadow nudged his hand gently, as if congratulating him. Because somehow, simply by asking for a dad for one day, Ethan had opened the door for countless others to ask for help too. The family we choose, and the dog who stayed, winter settled over Boston in its quiet, relentless way, frosting the rooftops and turning the Charles River into a muted ribbon of silver. Inside the city's community convention hall, warm lights glowed against the cold, casting soft reflections on rows of chairs filled with teachers, veterans, parents, and children. On the stage, beneath a banner that read, "Harbor Shield, 10 years of service," Ethan Parker stood straight-backed, now 16, taller, and steadier than the boy who once came into Harbor Diner, with a bruise hidden beneath his sleeve. His green hoodie, an echo of his childhood jacket, hung loosely on his lean frame. His sandy blonde hair, once unruly under a wool hat, now rested in softer waves over his forehead. Yet the most striking part of him remained unchanged. Those bright gray eyes, still searching the world with curiosity, but now holding something deeper, purpose, and the calm strength of someone who had been broken once and rebuilt slowly, carefully. He gripped the podium for a moment, grounding himself. The memory of the diner door opening, the startled looks from the veterans, Luke Turner's warm but sharp gaze, all of it rose with crystal clarity. And when he began to speak, his voice was steady, carrying both youthful tremor and unexpected maturity. "I was 6, he said. "Yeah, me was," he said, "and I just wanted someone to stand beside me on career day. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just asking for a dad for one morning. I was asking for safety, for someone to choose me." A soft murmur rippled through the room. In the front row, Luke Turner sat leaning slightly on a dark wooden cane. His shoulders were still broad, though age and injury pressed on them with more weight now. His winter coat, navy as always, hung on the back of his chair. His beard carried more silver, his hairline retreating a little, but his brown eyes watched Ethan with a quiet pride that had not dimmed. Beside him, Shadow lay curled like a sentinel tired from years of watching, but unwilling to retire. His once bold black and tan coat had paled around the muzzle to a frosted gray, and his movements were slower, more deliberate. Yet every time Ethan's voice shifted with emotion, Shadow's ears flicked gently, as if acknowledging every word. Ethan continued, "I thought the bravest thing I ever did was walk into Harbor Diner. But, it turns out, the bravest thing was letting myself believe I mattered enough for someone to say yes." A round of soft applause rose, but Ethan held up a hand, not to quiet them, but to steady himself. He inhaled deeply before he spoke again. "When Luke said yes, my whole life changed. And not just mine. Harbor Shield exists because a group of people refused to look away when a child asked for help. Now, after 10 years, thousands of kids know they don't have to face fear alone." Near the back of the room, a young social worker wiped her eyes, a bald, Veteran with tattoos covering both arms sniffed loudly but pretended he was just clearing his throat. A mother in a thick brown wool coat held her daughter's hand tightly, brushing tears from her cheeks. These were people who either worked with Harbor Shield or had once received its help. The legacy of one frightened child branched across the room, like a living, breathing map of second chances. Ethan's voice warmed as he turned slightly toward Luke. I couldn't choose my father, but I chose the person who treated me like a son. Luke didn't save me because he had to. He saved me because he wanted to. That's when I learned something important. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Luke's eyes softened, breaking through their usual stoic exterior. His left leg tensed. Old pain flared when emotions did, a reminder of scars long past. Shadow, sensing tension like only a veteran service dog could, pressed his head against Luke's boot. Ethan stepped away from the podium. The audience rose, applauding, some cheering quietly, others clapping with reverence. As he walked down the steps, Luke pushed himself up, gripping his cane first, then holding out an arm. Ethan moved into the embrace, solid and sure, the way a real son would. Shadow, unable to stand quickly now, shuffled forward anyway and nudged between them with a soft grunt. The crowd laughed gently at the familiar sight, the trio that had become the face of Harbor Shield. Ethan knelt, stroking Shadow's aging fur. "You still guarding me, old man?" he whispered. Shadow blinked once, slow and content, his tail tapping the floor with a soft rhythm. Luke rested a heavy palm on Ethan's shoulder. "You started all this," he murmured. "And you're not done. Neither am I." Ethan nodded. He knew there would still be nights when Luke woke from memories he couldn't control. He knew the ache in his own chest when thinking of his father would never fully disappear. But they had chosen each other, and that choice stitched their broken edges into something stronger. Outside, snow drifted gently against the glass doors, soft as blessing. Inside, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives had changed because one boy dared to ask for help, Ethan understood something fully for the first time. Love wasn't something you stumbled into. It was something you built, step by step, with the people who refused to let go. And as Shadow curled at their feet, eyes half closed, he looked, just for a moment, like a soldier finally at peace, guarding the family he had helped create. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive as lightning in the sky or angels in radiant robes. Sometimes they come as a tired veteran who stops to listen, a loyal dog who refuses to leave a child's side, or a stranger who chooses compassion when it would be easier to turn away. In the quiet corners of our everyday lives, grace still moves. It shows itself in the courage of a small boy asking for help, and in the hearts of those who answer. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it, leave a comment, subscribe, and let it reach someone who needs hope tonight. May God bless every viewer, guide your steps, protect your family, and remind you that even in the coldest winters, miracles still walk among us.